What if everything you worked so hard to build quietly cost you everything that actually mattered? Not your money, not your career, not your reputation, but the people, the moments, the love that was right there, waiting for you to finally show up. If you're watching this right now, I need you to stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you is not a story about someone else. It's about you. It's about the life that's still happening while you're busy planning for later. Emotional story of Raymond. His name was Raymond, 69 years old, retired for 8 months. He had a pension, a paid-off house, a garage full of tools, and a LinkedIn profile that still said 35 years of dedicated service. He had everything the world told him to chase, and he had chased it faithfully, obediently, without ever once looking back to see what was falling away behind him. But on a Tuesday evening in November, he sat at his kitchen table and realized something that no career achievement had ever prepared him for. The house was completely silent. His daughter hadn't called in 3 weeks. His son lived 40 minutes away, but might as well have lived on another continent. His wife of 31 years moved around the house like a polite stranger, because somewhere along the decades they had stopped being partners and become roommates. Raymond looked around that kitchen, at the refrigerator covered in old Christmas photos, at the empty chairs around the table, and felt something he had never allowed himself to feel during all those years of working. He felt invisible, not to the world, to the people he loved most. This is where we need to begin, because Raymond's story is not unusual. It is quietly, heartbreakingly common. And if you are over 50, if you have given the best hours of your days to a job or a business or a duty, then some part of what Raymond felt that Tuesday evening lives inside you too. Core section. Point 1. You were never too busy. You made a choice. And so did the people watching you. There is a version of this story that Raymond told himself for decades. He said, "I'm doing this for them. The long hours, the missed dinners, the weekends at the office, all of it is for my family." And he believed it. He believed it so deeply that he never stopped to ask whether his family believed it too. His daughter Clara was 12 years old the first time she stopped asking him to come to her school plays. Not because she stopped wanting him there, but because she had learned the answer before she asked the question. Children are not foolish. They learn quickly what is available and what is not. And what they learn, they carry into adulthood like weight they never asked to carry. By the time Clara was 35, she had a perfectly polite relationship with her father, phone calls on birthdays, visits at Christmas, and absolutely nothing in between. Raymond called it independence. Clara called it distance. The truth was that the distance had been built brick by brick, year by year, by a man who was always somewhere else. You may have told yourself the same story Raymond did, but the people in your life were not listening to your reasons. They were watching your choices. The lesson, your presence, was always the gift. The money was never a substitute. Point 2. The moment your body slows down, you discover what you actually built. No one tells you this when you are 45 and full of momentum and forward motion. No one sits you down and says, "One day you will not be able to outrun this." But retirement has a way of arriving like a verdict. Raymond had been defined by his work for so long that when it ended, he genuinely did not know who he was without it. His identity had been outsourced to a job title, and now the job title was gone. He woke up on his first Monday of retirement with nowhere to be, and instead of feeling freedom, he felt something closer to terror. He called his old colleagues. They were busy. He tried to fill the days with projects and errands and television. None of it touched the emptiness. What Raymond discovered in those early months of retirement was not leisure. It was the accumulated bill of a life lived outward instead of inward. Every relationship he had neglected, every conversation he had postponed, every "we'll do that when things slow down" he had promised, it all came due at once. The body slows, the calendar empties, and in that silence you are left alone with the math of how you spend your time. The lesson: retirement does not give you back the years. It only shows you clearly what you did with them. Reflective pause. I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself something honest. When was the last time someone in your family called you? Not because they needed something, not out of obligation, but simply because they wanted to hear your voice? Sit with that question. Really sit with it. Because the answer will tell you more about the state of your relationships than any family gathering ever could. Point 3. Loneliness in old age is not about being alone. It is about being surrounded by people who no longer know you. This is perhaps the cruelest form of loneliness, and it is the one no one ever talks about. Raymond was not without people. He had a wife, he had children, he had neighbors and a church community and old friends he saw twice a year. But in the quiet truth of his daily life, he was profoundly unknown. His wife, Margaret, had spent 30 years adapting to a husband who was emotionally unavailable, and she had built a life inside that adaptation, her garden, her books, her friendships with women from her book club. She was not cold, she was simply complete without him because she had learned to be. She had waited for him to come home emotionally for decades, and at some point she had simply stopped waiting. Raymond would try sometimes to start a real conversation about life, about feelings, about what they both wanted from the years ahead, and he would watch Margaret's face do something subtle and devastating. She would listen politely and then gently redirect the conversation to something manageable, something safe, because she had learned over 30 years that emotional depth was not something Raymond did. And even though he was trying now, there was an enormous amount of trust and tenderness to rebuild, and neither of them quite knew how to begin. The lesson, emotional absence over years, creates a distance that good intentions alone cannot cross overnight. Point 4. Your children will love you, but they will live their lives around the parent you actually were, not the one you meant to be. Raymond's son, Daniel, was a good man. Hard-working, responsible, decent. He called his father every other Sunday, regular as a schedule. He came for the holidays. He helped when there was something practical to be done, a leaking pipe, a car that needed looking at, a form that needed filling out. But he did not confide in Raymond. He did not call when something frightened him or when his marriage went through a rough patch or when he lay awake at night with the weight of his own life pressing down on him. He called a friend for that. Or he sat with it alone, because the template for how to handle hard emotions had been set long ago in a household where his father never once said, "I'm struggling," or "I'm scared," or "I need you." Children inherit what they witness. They do not inherit what they are told. Raymond had told his son to be strong, to work hard, to provide, and Daniel had done all of that admirably. But he had also learned that vulnerability had no place in the relationship between them. And so Raymond, at 69, had a son who was perfectly dutiful and almost completely unreachable. It is one of the quietest heartbreaks available to a parent. To have a child who loves you from a careful, learned distance. The lesson, the emotional language of your family was written by you, and your children have been fluent in it for decades. Confronting truth. Here is a truth that will be uncomfortable for some of you. The loneliness you feel now or may feel in the years ahead is not something that happened to you. It was built, gradually, by the everyday choices of who and what you prioritized. That is not a condemnation. It is simply the truth. And the only reason to face it honestly is because there is still time. Not unlimited time, not easy time, but time. And that matters enormously. Point 5. Regret has a weight that nothing else can match. There is a specific kind of regret that belongs only to the second half of life, and it is heavier than any other kind. It is not the regret of a mistake made in anger or a bad decision made in youth. It is the regret of a life lived on autopilot, of years that passed while you were looking elsewhere, years that held everything precious and were not recognized as precious until they were gone. Raymond had a memory that returned to him often in those quiet retirement mornings. His daughter Clara, at age 8, coming to the doorway of his home office on a Saturday afternoon, holding a book she wanted him to read with her. He had looked up from his desk with distracted eyes and said, "Not right now, sweetheart. Daddy's finishing something." She had nodded and gone away. He could not remember now what he had been finishing. He could not remember a single thing he accomplished that afternoon. But he remembered her face at the doorway with a clarity that startled him, because regret has a way of preserving certain images in perfect, painful detail. He would have given anything to go back to that Saturday, to close the laptop, to sit on the floor with his daughter and read whatever book she was holding. It was one afternoon, one ordinary, irreplaceable afternoon, and there were hundreds like it that he had spent the same way. The lesson: you will forget the work. You will never forget the moments you chose work over love. Point 6. The body keeps the score, and so does the heart. By 69, Raymond's health was what his doctor called managed. Blood pressure medication, a knee that ached in cold weather, a fatigue that settled in earlier each evening than it used to. He was not unwell, but he was aware, perhaps for the first time in his life, of his own physical limits, of his mortality. And this awareness changed everything about how he moved through the days. He began to notice how much energy it took to carry unspoken things. The apologies he had never made, the conversations he had avoided for years, the tenderness he had felt but never expressed, because somewhere along the way he had decided that expressing it was not something men like him did. He had carried all of it silently for so long that he had mistaken the weight for normalcy. But in the quietness of his retirement, with no commute to rush toward and no meetings to fill the silence, he could feel the weight clearly for the first time. The heart, it turns out, does not simply forget what it was denied. It holds everything. And at 69, Raymond's heart was holding a lifetime of unsaid things, and the pressure of them was remarkable. The lesson: emotional silence is not strength, it is a debt, and the interest accumulates for decades. Point 7. It is not too late, but it is also not as early as you think. This is the point where Raymond's story could have become a tragedy, and in some ways it did, but in other ways it became something else. Because Raymond, at 69, made a decision that took more courage than anything he had done in his entire professional life. He sat down with Margaret one evening, not at dinner, not during a television program, but deliberately in the living room with the television off. And he said something that took him nearly 7 decades to learn how to say. He said, "I think I missed a lot, and I'm sorry, and I don't know if it's too late, but I would like to try." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, very softly, "I've been waiting a very long time for you to say that." It was not a magical ending. There was no sudden transformation, no dramatic reunion, no single conversation that repaired 30 years of emotional distance. But it was a beginning, and beginnings, even late ones, are not nothing. They are everything. Raymond called Clara the following week and asked if he could visit, not for a holiday, not because something had happened, but simply because he wanted to see her. She was surprised. She said yes. He drove 4 hours and sat at her kitchen table and asked her about her life and listened, really listened, in a way he could not remember ever having done before. It was awkward in places. There were silences that did not quite know how to fill themselves. But when he drove home that evening, something in his chest felt fractionally lighter. Not fixed, but open. And open is where everything begins. The lesson, the courage to begin again, is available at any age. But you have to choose it before time makes the choice for you. Deep reflection segment. Time does something to us that we do not fully comprehend while it is happening. It moves at the same pace every day. 60 seconds in every minute, 60 minutes in every hour, and yet somehow decades disappear between one blink and the next. You were 40, and then you turned around and you were 60. The children who used to run through the house are grown and gone and living their own complicated lives in cities you rarely visit. The parents who were always there are now frail or gone entirely, and you are suddenly the oldest generation in your family, which is a position that arrives without a warning and carries a particular solemn weight. The photographs on Raymond's refrigerator told a story he had not consciously followed. There was a photo from 1987. He and Margaret on a beach somewhere, both of them laughing at something the camera had not caught. They looked young and easy with each other in a way that made Raymond ache slightly to look at. Then a Christmas photo from 1998, the children still young enough to be excited by it. Then a graduation, a wedding, a grandchild's birthday. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the photos became less frequent. The smiles became more formal. The gaps between gatherings grew longer. It was all there, documented on a refrigerator, the gradual cooling of a family's emotional closeness. Not through any dramatic rupture, not through any single catastrophic event, simply through the slow, steady accumulation of absence. There is a particular silence that belongs to evenings in a house that used to be full. Raymond knew this silence well by now. It was not the silence of peace or the silence of contentment. It was the silence of a life that had moved on while he had been facing in the other direction. He would sit in the living room in the early evenings and listen to the house settle around him and think about all the things he had meant to do and say and feel and had kept postponing because there had always seemed to be more time. There is no cruelty in the universe quite like the cruelty of having genuinely believed that there was always more time. Ending message. We began with Raymond sitting alone in a quiet house, feeling invisible to the people he loved most. And I want to return to that image now, not to leave you there, but to ask you something real. What is the quiet house in your life? What is the unanswered call, the empty chair, the relationship that has drifted so gradually you barely noticed it moving? Because the point of Raymond's story is not that he failed. It is that he woke up, painfully, belatedly, with great humility and great courage. He woke up and decided that the years still ahead of him were worth something, that the people still in his life were worth showing up for, fully, emotionally, completely, in a way he had not managed to do during the years he had mistaken for his real life. The real life was always the one happening in the margins, at the kitchen table, at the school play, on the Saturday afternoon with the book, in the conversation that had been waiting for years for someone to begin it. Be reading this and thinking that it is too late for you, that the distance in your relationships is too great, that the silences have lasted too long to break. But Raymond thought that too, and Raymond was wrong, not because everything became easy, but because the people who love you, even from a careful, learned distance, are still there, still waiting in their own private way for the version of you that finally stopped being too busy to arrive. You have spent so much of your life building things, a career, a reputation, a sense of security, and those things are not meaningless, but they will not sit with you in the evenings, they will not answer when you call. They will not soften the particular loneliness that arrives in the second half of a life when the world grows quieter and you are left with the truest version of the question that every human life eventually asks: did I love well? Did I give my real attention to the people and moments that deserved it most? You still have time to answer that question differently than Raymond did in his first 69 years. But that window is not infinite. It never was. Make the call you have been postponing. Have the conversation you have been avoiding. Say the thing that has been sitting unexpressed in your chest for years, waiting for the right moment that you have kept deciding had not yet arrived. The right moment is now. It has always been now. Take care of yourself, because time never waits.